for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. So many Republicans are running for president that we have to come up with a scorecard to keep track of all of them. The debt bill has been passed by the House, but Bernie Sanders says he's not going to vote for the bill in the Senate. Could the Senate stymie the debt ceiling? Also, good news, as Oath Keepers founder Stewart Rhodes is going to go to prison for the next 20 years or so. A couple of his co-defendants are also going to prison for their role in the traitorous January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol. Some of those defendants in the January 6th riot are raking in donations, but hold on, the government's coming after that money. We'll tell you about that. We have an update to Ottawa County, and we have a Hammer Time segment this week, and much, much more. Before we get started with today's topics, a couple of reminders. You can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on Twitter at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. And you can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to your local Pacifica affiliate. And as we move further along into the election cycle, we haven't even hit 2024 yet. We're actually recording this show on June 1st of 2023. But the Republicans are now coming out of the woodwork to run for president. So far confirmed, running for president for the Republican Party, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, yes, I refuse to use his actual last name, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, I believe he's running as a moderate, which is surprising. I'm surprised they even let him do that. I figure they run all the moderates out of the party. Also running South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, former Salem Media Group radio host Larry Elder. Of course, we've talked about Salem Media on this show. Bunch of Christo-fascist conservatives, my opinion. Businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump, of course, Michigan businessman and former gubernatorial candidate Perry Johnson. Yes, the alien has reared its ugly head. He does. He looks like an alien with a bad haircut. Tax consultant John Castro, the former mayor of Cranston, Rhode Island, Steve Laffey, and former Montana Secretary of State Corey Stapleton. But there's more that are going to be getting into the race. We are expecting that former Vice President Mike Pence and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie will announce very soon, as will North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. So there you go, folks. On the Democratic side, you've got Joe Biden. You also have Marianne Williamson and anti-vaxxer himself, a former host of Ring of Fire Radio, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I'm throwing my weight in the primary behind Marianne Williamson because she's as close to Bernie Sanders as you're going to get. By the way, Bernie Sanders has said he is not running in 2024. He is done running for president. So he must have took my advice after he got screwed again in 2020 and just said, forget it. I'm done. I got better things to do with my time. So he says he's going to do whatever he can to get Biden reelected because of Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. He doesn't want any more radical Republicans in the White House. So I do have to agree there with him on that. Like I said, I wish he would run, and I wish that the Democrats would just pull their heads out of their asses and get behind Bernie. They really need to. You know, if it's not going to be Bernie, let it be Katie Porter. Let it be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Let it be Rashida Tlaib. That would be awesome. You know, it's just crazy. Oh, boy. Well, let's go ahead. Let's get into the debt limit. This is Kevin Frecking, Farnoosh Amiri, and Stephen Groves writing for the Associated Press dated May 31st out of Washington. President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy have been working the phones in an intense push to sell Congress on the 99-page bill that would suspend the nation's debt limit through 2025 to avoid a federal default while limiting government spending. The Democratic president, Republican speaker have to win their respective party support for the plan in time to avert a default that would shake the global economy. And, of course, we now know that the House voted. It was, I think, 314 to 113 or something to that effect. But it passed in the House. It goes to the Senate. And we'll get to Bernie Sanders' statement in just a little bit here. On Tuesday, lawmakers began scrutinizing and debating the legislation, which also includes provisions to fund medical care for veterans, change work requirements for some recipients of government aid, and streamline environmental reviews for controversial pipelines and other projects. The modest deal gives both men wins to tout, with Biden protecting major parts of his agenda from Republican cuts and McCarthy scoring several conservative spending caps and changes to government programs. So here's the details of the deal reached between Biden and McCarthy. The agreement would keep non-defense spending roughly flat in the 2024 fiscal year and increase it by 1% the following year, as well as suspend the debt limit until January 2025, past the next presidential election. For the next fiscal year, the bill matches Biden's proposed defense budget of $886 billion and allots $704 billion for non-defense spending. The bill also requires Congress to approve 12 annual spending bills or face a snapback to spending limits from the previous year, which would mean a 1% cut. The legislation aims to limit federal budget growth to 1% for the next 6 years, but that provision would not be enforceable starting in 2025. Overall, the Congressional Budget Office projected Tuesday that the bill would reduce budget deficits by about $1.5 trillion over the next decade. For veterans care, the agreement would fully fund medical care for veterans at the levels included in Biden's proposed 2024 budget blueprint, including a fund dedicated to veterans who have been exposed to toxic substances or environmental hazards. Biden sought $20.3 billion for the Toxic Exposure Fund in his budget. The agreement would rescind about $30 billion in unspent coronavirus relief money that Congress approved through previous bills. It claws back unobligated money from dozens of federal programs that received aid during the pandemic, including rental assistance, small business loans, and broadband for rural areas. The legislation protects pandemic funding for veterans' medical care, housing assistance, the Indian Health Service, and some $5 billion for a program focused on rapidly developing the next generation of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. Republicans targeted money that the IRS was allotted last year to crack down on tax fraud. The bill bites into some IRS funding, rescinding $1.4 billion. Budget scorekeepers said the change would increase deficits by $900 million because less enforcement means less revenue coming into the Treasury. Duh! The White House has said that the deal also includes an agreement to take $20 billion from the IRS over the next 2 years and use that money for other non-defense programs. Well, we'll get into why that's a terrible idea. We'll do it right now. When you don't have enough IRS agents going out and auditing and going after some of these people that defraud the system, you know what fund loses out the most when there's fewer IRS agents? It's not the general treasury. No, it's Social Security. Social Security could be funded for the next 75 years if there were enough IRS agents to go after some of these cheats. Some of these businesses that won't pay their Social Security, their FICA taxes, or anything like that. If they went after them and went after them hard, then Social Security would be funded for the next 75 years. There wouldn't need to be any cuts. There wouldn't need to be raising the retirement age or cutting benefits or anything like that. And for that matter, if they really want to fund Social Security, raise the cap on income. That's how you do it, folks, because right now it's capped at a certain amount. If you make above a certain amount, you don't get FICA taxes on the amount above the limit. You pay the limit, but once you're past it, you pay nothing. The limit needs to go away, period. It really does, folks. The agreement would expand work requirements for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps, a longtime Republican priority. But the changes are pared down from the House-passed debt ceiling bill. Work requirements already exist for most able-bodied adults between the ages of 18 and 49. The bill would phase in higher age limits, bringing the maximum age to 54 by 2025. But the provision expires, bringing the maximum age back down to age 49 5 years later in 2030. Democrats also want some new expanded benefits for veterans, homeless people, and young people aging out of foster care. That would also expire in 2030, according to the agreement. The agreement would also make it slightly harder for states to waive work requirements for SNAP for certain individuals. Current law allows states to issue some exemptions to the work rules on a discretionary basis, but limits how many people can be exempted. The agreement would lower the number of exemptions that a state can issue and curb states' ability to carry over the number of exemptions they can hand out from month to month. The agreement would also make changes to the Temporary Assistance to Needy Families program, which gives cash aid to families with children. While not going as far as the House bill had proposed, the deal would make adjustments to a credit that allows states to require fewer recipients to work, updating and readjusting the credit to make it harder for states to avoid. The deal puts in place changes in the National Environmental Policy Act for the first time in nearly 4 decades that would designate a single lead agency to develop and schedule environmental reviews in hopes of streamlining the process. It also simplifies some of the requirements for environmental reviews, including placing length limitations on environmental assessments and impact statements. Agencies will be given 1 year to complete environmental reviews, and projects that are deemed to have complex impacts on the environment will need to be reviewed within 2 years. The bill also gives special treatment to the Mountain Valley Pipeline, a West Virginia natural gas pipeline championed by Senators Joe Manchin and Shelley Moore Capito, by approving all its outstanding permit requests. So there you go. The environment's going to get screwed on this one. Thank you, Joe Manchin. He needs to be primaried by an actual progressive. Get him out of office. He is a Republican wearing Democrat clothing. Oh, but you got to vote blue no matter who. Oh, really? No, you don't. Republicans have long sought to reel back the Biden administration's efforts to provide student loan relief and aid to millions of borrowers during the coronavirus pandemic. While the GOP proposal to rescind the White House's plan to waive $10,000 to $20,000 in debt for nearly all borrowers failed to make it into the package, Biden agreed to put an end to the pause on student loan repayment. The pause in student loan repayments would end in the final days of August. So, again, if you have a student loan, you're screwed. The fate of Biden's broader student loan relief, meanwhile, will be decided at the Supreme Court, which is dominated 6-3 by its right-wing conservative wing. During oral arguments in the case, several of the justices expressed deep skepticism about the legality of Biden's plan. A decision is expected before the end of June. House Republicans passed legislation last month that would have created new work requirements for some Medicaid recipients, but that was left out of the final agreement. The idea faced stiff opposition from the White House and congressional Democrats, who said it would lead to fewer people able to afford food or health care without actually increasing the number of people in the workforce. Also absent from the final deal is the GOP proposal to repeal many of the clean energy tax credits Democrats passed in party line votes last year to boost the production and consumption of clean energy. McCarthy and Republicans have argued that the tax breaks, quote, distort the market and waste taxpayer money, end of quote. Yeah, but giving welfare to the oil companies, that doesn't distort the market and it doesn't waste taxpayer money, does it there? Yeah, I think it does. The White House has defended the tax credits as resulting in hundreds of billions of dollars in private sector investments, creating thousands of manufacturing jobs in the U.S. After this episode was recorded, the U.S. Senate convened for the vote on the debt ceiling. The measure passed on a 63-36 vote. One senator was absent because he was attending his high school son's graduation ceremony. Of the 36 senators who voted no, 31 of them were Republicans, 4 Democrats, and independent Senator Bernie Sanders. The 4 Democrats who voted no included Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, Ed Markey of Massachusetts, and Jeff Merkley of Oregon. Bernie Sanders explained his reasons in a press release issued late Wednesday. Here's what the statement said. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent Vermont, on Wednesday issued the following statement on the debt ceiling agreement. He said this: let's be clear, the original debt ceiling legislation that Republicans passed in the House would have, over a 10-year period, made savage cuts to programs that working families, the children, the sick, the elderly, and the poor desperately need. The best thing to be said about the current deal on the debt ceiling is that it could have been much worse. Instead of making massive cuts to health care, education, child care, nutrition assistance, and other vital programs over the next decade, this bill proposes to make modest cuts to these programs over a 2-year period. This bill will also prevent an economic catastrophe by extending the debt ceiling until January 1st, 2025, when we will have to go with this absurd process once again. Having said that, I cannot vote for this bill. At a time of massive wealth and income equality, I cannot, in good conscience, vote for a bill that takes vital nutrition assistance away from women, infants, children, and seniors, while refusing to ask billionaires who have never had it so good to pay a penny more in taxes. I cannot, in good conscience, vote for a bill that makes it harder for working families to afford the outrageously high price of child care, housing, and health care, while making it easier for the wealthiest people and most profitable corporations in America to cheat on their taxes. At a time when climate change is, by far, the most existential threat facing our country and the entire world, I cannot, in good conscience, vote for a bill that makes it easier for fossil fuel companies to pollute and destroy the planet by fast-tracking the disastrous Mountain Valley Pipeline. When the future of the world is literally at stake, we must have the courage to stand up to the fossil fuel industry and tell them and the politicians they sponsor that the future of the planet is more important than their short-term profits. At a time when we spend more on the military than the next 10 nations combined, I cannot, in good conscience, vote for a bill that increases funding for the bloated Pentagon and large defense contractors that continue to make huge profits by fleecing American taxpayers with impunity. Let me remind my colleagues that the Pentagon is the only federal agency that cannot pass an independent audit or account for trillions of dollars in spending. At a time when the pharmaceutical industry is charging the American people by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, I cannot, in good conscience, vote for a bill that does nothing to take on the greed of the big drug companies that are bankrupting Medicare and cancer patients while spending tens of billions of dollars on stock buybacks and dividends. At a time when over 45 million Americans are drowning in student debt, I cannot, in good conscience, vote for a bill that eliminates the moratorium on student loan payments that has been a lifeline to millions of working families during the pandemic. Deficit reduction cannot just be about cutting programs that working families, the children, the sick, the elderly, and the poor depend upon. It must be about demanding that the billionaire class and profitable corporations pay their fair share of taxes, reining in out-of-control military spending, reducing the price of prescription drugs, and ending billions of dollars in corporate welfare that goes to the fossil fuel industry and other corporate interests. The fact of the matter is that this bill is totally unnecessary. The president has the authority and the ability to eliminate the debt ceiling today by invoking the 14th Amendment. I look forward to the day when he exercises this authority and puts an end once and for all to the outrageous actions of the extreme right wing to hold our entire economy hostage in order to get what they want. That is the statement from Senator Bernie Sanders. Bravo, sir. All right, let's get to some really good news now. This is Michael Kunzelman, Alana Durkin-Richer, and Lindsay Whitehurst writing for the Associated Press. This is dated May 25th out of Washington. Oath Keepers extremist group founder Stewart Rhodes was sentenced to 18 years in prison for orchestrating a weeks-long plot that culminated in his followers attacking the U.S. Capitol in a bid to keep President Joe Biden out of the White House after winning the 2020 election. The 58-year-old Rhodes is the first person convicted of seditious conspiracy in the January 6, 2021 traitorous attack to receive his punishment, and his sentence is the longest handed down so far in the hundreds of Capitol riot cases. By the way, I added the word traitorous because that's what it was. They are traitors. It's another milestone for the Justice Department's sprawling January 6 investigation, which has led to seditious conspiracy convictions against the top leaders of two far-right extremist groups authorities say came to Washington prepared to fight to keep Donald Trump in power at all costs. In a statement, Attorney General Merrick Garland said, quote, "The Justice Department will continue to do everything in our power to hold accountable those criminally responsible for the January 6th attack on our democracy." End of quote. In a first for a January 6th case, the judge agreed with the Justice Department that Rhodes' actions should be punished as terrorism, which increases the recommended sentence under federal guidelines. That decision could foreshadow lengthy sentences down the road for other far-right extremists, including former Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, who has also been convicted of the rarely used charge. Before announcing Rhodes' sentence, U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta described a defiant Rhodes as a continued threat to the United States and democracy. The judge expressed fear that what happened on January 6 could be repeated, saying Americans will, quote, "now hold our collective breaths every time an election is approaching," end of quote. The judge also told Rhodes, quote, "You are smart, you are charismatic and compelling, and frankly, that's what makes you dangerous. The moment you are released, whenever that may be, you will be ready to take up arms against your government," end of quote. Rhodes did not use his chance to address the judge to express remorse or appeal for leniency, but instead claimed to be a political prisoner, criticized prosecutors and the Biden administration, and tried to play down his actions on January 6th. Rhodes, who appeared in Washington's federal court wearing orange jail clothes, said, quote, "I'm a political prisoner, and like Donald Trump, my only crime is opposing those who are destroying our country," end of quote. Oh, his orange jail clothes reminds me of Donald Trump's skin color. Judge Mehta fired back that Rhodes was not prosecuted for his political beliefs, but for actions the judge described as, quote, an offense against the people of the country. You are not a political prisoner, Mr. Rhodes, end of quote. Another Oath Keeper convicted of seditious conspiracy alongside Rhodes, Florida chapter leader Kelly Meggs, was sentenced later that day to 12 years behind bars. Meggs said he was sorry he was involved in the riot that left, quote, a black eye on the country, end of quote, but maintained that he never planned to go to the Capitol. The judge found Meggs doesn't present an ongoing threat to the country the way Rhodes does, but told him, quote, violence cannot be resorted to just because you disagree with who got elected, end of quote. Other Oath Keepers are expected to be sentenced in the coming days. This is beautiful. A Washington, D.C. jury found Rhodes guilty of leading a plot to forcibly disrupt the transfer of presidential power. Prosecutors alleged Rhodes and his followers recruited members, amassed weapons, and set up quick reaction force teams at a Virginia hotel that could ferry guns into the nation's capital if they were needed to support their plot. The weapons were never deployed. It was one of the most consequential Capitol riot cases brought by the government, which has sought to prove that the attack by right-wing extremists such as the Oath Keepers was not a spur-of-the-moment protest, but the culmination of weeks of plotting to overturn Biden's victory. Rhodes' January 2022 arrest was the culmination of a decades-long path of extremism that included armed standoffs with federal authorities at Nevada's Bundy Ranch. After founding the Oath Keepers in 2009, the Yale Law School graduate built it into one of the largest far-right anti-government militia groups in the U.S., though it appears to have weakened in the wake of the Oath Keepers' arrests. How this guy got into Yale Law School is beyond me. Have they lowered their standards that much there? Jeez. The judge agreed to prosecutors' request for a so-called terrorism enhancement, which can lead to a longer prison term, under the argument that the Oath Keepers sought to influence the government through intimidation or coercion. Judges in less serious January 6 cases had previously rejected such requests. Prosecutors had sought 25 years for Rhodes, arguing that a lengthy sentence was necessary to deter future political violence. I got a better idea. Death penalty. It's really that simple. Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Ricazzi pointed to interviews and speeches Rhodes has given from jail repeating the lie that the 2020 election was stolen and saying it would be again in 2024. In remarks just days ago, Rhodes called for regime change, according to the prosecutor. Rhodes, who is from Granbury, Texas, plans to appeal his conviction. Well, good luck there, buddy. Defense lawyer Philip Linder told the judge the prosecutors were unfairly trying to make Rhodes the face of January 6th, adding that Rhodes could have had many more Oath Keepers come to the Capitol, quote, if he really wanted to, end of quote, disrupt Congress's certification of the Electoral College vote. Yeah. Linder said, quote, if you want to put a face on January 6th, you put it on Trump, right-wing media, politicians, all the people who spun that narrative, end of quote. Well, and the people who bought into that. If you bought into it, you're just as culpable as the ones who spun this idiocy. Rhodes' sentence may signal the punishment prosecutors will seek for Terrio and other Proud Boy leaders convicted of seditious conspiracy. They will be sentenced in August and September. The Oath Keeper said there was never any plan to attack the Capitol or stop Congress from certifying Biden's victory. Well, then why did they go there in the first place? The defense tried to seize on the fact that none of the Oath Keepers' messages lay down an explicit plan to storm the Capitol. But prosecutors said the Oath Keepers saw an opportunity to further their goal to stop the transfer of power and sprang into action when the mob began storming the building. Messages, recordings, and other evidence presented at trial show Rhodes and his followers growing increasingly enraged after the 2020 election at the prospect of a Biden presidency, which they viewed as a threat to the country and their way of life. In an encrypted chat 2 days after the election, Rhodes told his followers to prepare their mind, body, and spirit for civil war. Yep, he said it, folks. These violent conservative traitors want to start a civil war. I said it when I started this show 11 years ago. I can go back and dig into the archives and pull up the tape of it. Before Rhodes was sentenced, the longest sentence in the more than 1,000 Capitol riot cases was 14 years for a man with a long criminal record who attacked police officers with pepper spray in a chair as he stormed the Capitol. Just over 500 of the defendants have been sentenced, with more than half receiving prison time, the remainder getting sentences such as probation or home detention. Well, they should have stayed home on January 6th, then they wouldn't be in home detention. Then we have this follow-up the following day. Again, Michael Kunzelman, Lindsay Whitehurst, and Alana Durkin-Richer writing for the Associated Press out of Washington. The following day, 2 Army veterans who stormed the U.S. Capitol in a military-style formation with fellow members of the Oath Keepers were sentenced Friday to prison terms, a day after the far-right extremist group's founder received a record-setting 18 years behind bars for the January 6th attack. U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta sentenced Jessica Watkins of Woodstock, Ohio, to 8 years and 6 months behind bars, and sentenced Kenneth Harrelson of Titusville, Florida, to 4 years in prison. A federal jury acquitted Watkins and Harrelson of the seditious conspiracy charge that Oath Keepers founder Stewart Rhodes was found guilty of in November. But jurors convicted Watkins and Harrelson of other January 6 charges, including obstructing Congress's certification of President Joe Biden's victory. Mehta agreed with the Justice Department that Rhodes and the other Oath Keepers' actions could be punished as terrorism, increasing the recommended sentence under federal guidelines. But the judge ultimately gave Watkins and Harrelson far less time than prosecutors were seeking. The Justice Department requested 18 years for Watkins and 15 for Harrelson. Watkins and Harrelson marched toward the Capitol with other Oath Keepers members in stacked formations as a mob of Trump supporters clashed with outnumbered police officers. Harrelson was the group's ground team lead on January 6th. Watkins, who founded a separate Ohio-based militia group, recruited others to join the Oath Keepers in Washington that day. Mehta said that while Watkins was not a top leader like Rhodes, she was more than just a foot soldier, noting that at least 3 others charged in the riot wouldn't have been there if she hadn't recruited them to join. He told her, quote, "Your role that day was more aggressive, more assaultive, more purposeful than perhaps others," end of quote. Watkins tearfully apologized for her actions before the judge handed down her sentence. She condemned the violence by rioters who assaulted police, but conceded that her presence at the Capitol, quote, "probably inspired those people to a degree," end of quote. She described herself as, quote, "just another idiot running around the Capitol," end of quote, on January 6th. Yeah, I'll agree with her there. Yeah, you hit that one right on the head, lady. Bingo. Yeah. She told the judge, quote, "and today you're going to hold this idiot responsible," end of quote. The judge said Watkins' personal story of struggling for years to come to terms with her identity as a transgender woman made it especially difficult for him to understand why she has shown a lack of empathy for those who suffered on January 6th. Watkins testified at trial about hiding her identity from her parents during a strict Christian upbringing and going AWOL in the Army after a fellow soldier found evidence of her contact with a support group for transgendered people. Harrelson told the judge he went to Washington after another Oath Keeper offered him a security job, but said he has never voted for a president in his life and doesn't care about politics. Yeah, I bet that's not true. Some of the Oath Keepers provided security for Trump ally Roger Stone and other right-wing figures at events before the riot. As he broke down in tears, he said, quote, "I have totally demolished my life. I am responsible, and my foolish actions have caused immense pain to my wife and our children," end of quote. Mehta said he doesn't agree with the government's portrayal of Harrelson as a mid-level organizer for the Oath Keepers. Unlike many other group members charged in the attack, Harrelson didn't send any messages that, quote, anyone would consider extremist, end of quote. However, the judge said he was struck by an image of Harrelson panning down a police officer on his way out of the Capitol. The judge told him, quote, "You weren't just there that day because you got swept in," end of quote. Oh boy, let's go ahead and skip to our next story here. Again, more January 6th stuff. This is, again, Michael Kunzelman writing for the AP. May 28th is the date on this story. Less than 2 months after he pleaded guilty to storming the U.S. Capitol, Texas resident Daniel Goodwin appeared on Tucker Carlson's then Fox Propaganda Channel show and promoted a website where supporters could donate money to Goodwin and other rioters whom the site called political prisoners. The Justice Department now wants Goodwin to give up more than $25,000 he raised, a clawback that is part of a growing effort by the government to prevent rioters from being able to personally profit from participating in the attack that shook the foundations of American democracy. An Associated Press review of court records show that prosecutors in the more than 1,000 criminal cases from January 6th are increasingly asking judges to impose fines on top of prison sentences to offset donations from supporters of the Capitol rioters. Dozens of defendants have set up online fundraising appeals for help with legal fees, and prosecutors acknowledge there's nothing wrong with asking for help for attorney expenses. But the Justice Department has, in some cases, questioned where the money is really going because many of those charged have had government-funded legal representation. Most of the fundraising efforts appear on GiveSendGo, which bills itself as the #1 free Christian fundraising site. Hallelujah! And has become a haven for January 6 defendants barred from using mainstream crowdfunding sites, including GoFundMe, to raise money. The rioters often proclaim their innocence and portray themselves as victims of government oppression. Yes, they do. Yeah. Here's my opinion on that. Even as they cut deals to plead guilty and cooperate with prosecutors. Their fundraising success suggests that many people in the United States still view January 6 rioters as patriots and cling to the baseless belief that Democrats stole the 2020 presidential election from Donald Trump. Trump himself has fueled that idea, pledging to pardon rioters if he is reelected, which God forbid. Yeah, the people that are funding this are just as culpable as the traitors themselves, because they're traitors too. They really are. They don't care about this country. They would spit on this country if they got the chance to. Marcus Malley, a Virginia man scheduled to be sentenced next month for assaulting police at the Capitol, raised more than $16,000 from an online campaign that described him as a January 6th POW and asked for money for his family. Prosecutors have requested a $16,000+ fine, noting that Malley had a public defender and did not owe any legal fees. A prosecutor wrote in court papers, quote, "He should not be able to use his own notoriety gained in the commission of his crimes to capitalize on his participation in the Capitol breach in this way." End of quote. So far this year, prosecutors have sought more than $390,000 in fines against at least 21 riot defendants in amounts ranging from $450 to more than $71,000, according to the Associated Press tally. Judges have imposed at least $124,127 in fines against 33 riot defendants this year. In the previous 2 years, judges ordered more than 100 riot defendants to collectively pay more than $240,000 in fines. Separately, judges have ordered hundreds of convicted rioters to pay more than $524,000 in restitution to the government to cover more than $2.8 million in damage to the Capitol and other January 6th related expenses. Most rioters facing the most serious charges and longest prison terms are now being sentenced. They tend to also be the prolific fundraisers, which could help explain the recent surge in fine requests. Earlier this month, the judge who sentenced Nathaniel DeGrave to more than 3 years in prison also ordered him to pay a $25,000 fine. Prosecutors noted that the Nevada resident incredibly raised over $120,000 in GiveSendGo fundraising campaigns that referred to him as, quote, Beijing Biden's political prisoner, end of quote, in, quote, America's Gitmo, end of quote, as a reference to the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center. Prosecutor wrote, quote, he did this despite seeking to cooperate with the government and admitting he and his co-conspirators were guilty since at least November 2021, end of quote. Lawyer William Shipley, who has represented DeGrave and more than 24 other January 6th defendants, said he advises clients to avoid raising money under the auspices of being a political prisoner if they intend to plead guilty. Shipley said, quote, until they admit they committed a crime, they're perfectly entitled to shout from the rooftops that the only reason they're being held is because of politics. It's just First Amendment political speech. End of quote. No, it is lies. There are lies and there are damn lies. I forget who said that. I'll have to look that up. Shipley said he provided the judge with documentation showing that DeGrave raised approximately $25,000 more than what he paid his lawyers. Shipley said, quote, I've never had to do it until these cases because I've never had clients that had third-party fundraising like this. There's a segment of the population that is sympathetic toward the plight of these defendants. End of quote. Yeah, they're called morons. You're suckers. You're being suckered for your money. GiveSendGo co-founder Heather Wilson said her site's decision to allow legal defense funds for Capitol riot defendants, quote, is rooted in our society's commitment to the presumption of innocence and the freedom for all individuals to hire private attorneys, end of quote. Yeah, I wonder how much she's getting off of all this money that's being raised through her site. I'm sure that's more the motivating factor for her. Sorry. Entrepreneurship, or as I call it, entrepreneurship. The government's push for more fines comes as it reaches a milestone in the largest federal investigation in American history. Just over 500 defendants have been sentenced for January 6th crimes. However, judges are not rubber stamping prosecutors' fine request. Prosecutors sought more than $70,000 in fines for Peter Schwartz, a Kentucky man who attacked police officers outside the Capitol with pepper spray and a chair. U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta sentenced Schwartz this month to more than 14 years in prison, one of the longest so far in a Capitol riot case, but did not impose a fine. Prosecutors suspect Schwartz tried to profit from his fundraising campaign, Patriot Pete, political prisoner in D.C., but his lawyer, Dennis Boyle, said there is no evidence of that. Boyle said that the judge, quote, basically said that if the money was being used for attorney's fees or other costs like that, there was no basis for a fine, end of quote. A jury convicted romance novel cover model John Strand of storming the Capitol with Dr. Simone Gold, a California physician who is a leading figure in the anti-vaccine movement. So she's double dumb. She's a traitor and she's an anti-vaxxer. Double dumb. Now, prosecutors are seeking a $50,000 fine on top of a prison term for Strand when he's sentenced. Strand has raised more than $17,300 for his legal defense without disclosing that he has a taxpayer-funded lawyer, according to prosecutors. They say Strand appears to have substantial financial means, living in a home that was purchased for more than $3 million last year. Prosecutors wrote, quote, Strand has raised and continues to raise money on his website based upon his false statements and misrepresentations on the events of January 6th, end of quote. Goodwin, who appeared on Carlson's show in March, is scheduled to be sentenced next month. Defense lawyer Carolyn Stewart described prosecutors as, quote, demanding blood from a stone, end of quote, and asking for the $25,000 fine. Stewart wrote, quote, he received that money in charity to help him in his debt for legal fees for former attorneys, and this, for unknown reasons, is bothersome to the government, end of quote. Yeah, because they're profiting off of it. They're profiting off of crime. You're not allowed to do that in this country. All right, folks, that's enough of the January 6th stuff. Let's get to some more fun stuff, but we have to play the intro music. Yes, it's that time again for As Ottawa County Turns. And now, Hawker and Ramble present As Ottawa County Turns. Brought to you today by Diz Laundry Detergent. It breaks down protein so well that Monica Lewinsky should have used it on that blue dress. Yep. I bet Bill Clinton would have got off. Oh, wait. Never mind. All right, let's get to our story here. This is Mitchell Boatman and Sarah Leach writing for the Holland Sentinel. This was published May 24th. More than 6 hours into a meeting and after more than 100 public comments, the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners voted early Wednesday morning, May 24th, to approve a resolution declaring Ottawa County a constitutional county. The meeting began at 6:30 Tuesday, May 23rd, but the vote on the constitutional county resolution, which was the first action item on the agenda, didn't come until after midnight. After midnight, we're gonna rip up the Constitution. Yeah, sorry, Eric Clapton. Another noted anti-vaxxer and total moron. Commissioners voted 9-1 in favor of the measure. The lone vote against the motion was from Commissioner Doug Zylstra. Commissioner Roger Bergman, who also would have voted no, was absent from the meeting. So all of the Ottawa Impact aligned commissioners and the two former Ottawa Impact aligned commissioners voted in favor of this. After making the motion and reading the resolution, Commissioner Sylvia Rodea said, quote, "The Constitution is a contract of timeless principles that created and defined government for a singular purpose, to secure the rights of the people. We are committed to upholding the Constitution as written." End of quote. Oh, really? Yeah, I don't think so, lady. She added, quote, "We would be negligent in our duties if we did not ensure that the Constitution is upheld and protected while fulfilling our responsibility to the people of Ottawa County." End of quote. Didn't you already do that when you took the oath of office? I'm confused here. Commissioner Allison Miedema said prior to the vote that the resolution, quote, "affirms my oath of office, and it also sets the precedents and resoluteness I will take to secure and protect all we hold dear." End of quote. Yeah, exactly. All you conservatives hold dear. Screw everybody else. Commissioner Joe Moss, who's the board chair, concluded discussion by saying the resolution aligned with the contract written by Ottawa Impact and that he's, quote, "very happy to fulfill that commitment that I made very publicly and have supported for a long time." End of quote. Yeah, I'm not buying it either. Zylstra, in a social media post, said he voted no over a lack of clarity over who will interpret the constitutionality of laws. He wrote this, quote, "In the end, I voted no on the constitutional county resolution because I find the lack of clarity around who is doing the interpretation of the Constitution and the implication that the board or even the board chair will be doing the interpretation is deeply concerning." End of quote. Zylstra attempted to amend the resolution, striking paragraphs 1 through 14 and replacing them with language he provided commissioners during the meeting. The motion did not receive support and thus was not voted on. Yeah, because they're all a bunch of power-hungry, violent, conservative traitors. Zylstra also said he was disappointed his amendment failed and felt it, quote, "would have accomplished our stated goal of demonstrating the board's commitment to ensuring that Ottawa County is a place where constitutional freedoms are honored and respected, and would have addressed various of the concerns brought to us by Ottawa residents." End of quote. More than 100 citizens attended to offer public comment. There were around 60 who spoke against the resolution, 40 spoke in favor of it, although several speakers left prior to their turn. Experts have previously told the Holland Sentinel that the resolution is not legally binding and merely a symbolic move that many counties, most recently Livingston County, have utilized in response to the Democratic-controlled State House and Senate that recently enacted gun reform laws, which were signed into law by Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The mass shooting at Michigan State University in February, which killed 3 students and injured 5 others, accelerated the timeline for lawmakers to adopt gun safety proposals that were already in the works. Democrats targeted 3 main gun safety issues: safe storage laws that create penalties for those who fail to securely store firearms that end up in the hands of minors; universal background checks that require background check for all firearm purchases in Michigan. According to committee testimony, Currently, background checks are not required for guns sold by non-licensed dealers like individual gun owners or for certain weapons. And extreme risk protection orders, often referred to as red flag laws, would allow courts to temporarily take firearms away from those deemed a risk to themselves or others. Although the resolution talks of a constitutional county, the wording repeatedly emphasizes the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, as well as the protection of parental rights under the 14th Amendment. Oh, we're going to go there now. Yeah, Moss, Rodea, and all of their sycophants are still pissed that the state of Michigan and Governor Whitmer and the state health board shut down all the businesses and all the schools during COVID. That's what they're really pissed about. It's nothing else but that. They want to have control. They want to have total control over everything. They are Christo-fascists. They really are. Although the phrases parents and parental rights are not found in the 14th Amendment, conservatives have argued since the 1990s that the Due Process Clause within the amendment, quote, protects the fundamental right of parents to direct the care, upbringing, and education of their children, end of quote. Yeah, really? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Although the board cannot direct how the sheriff and prosecutor perform their duties, Moss's resolution, quote, strongly encourages them to continuously act in a constitutional manner, end of quote, and says the board will not authorize or appropriate any funds or resources, quote, for the purpose of enforcing any statute, law, rule, order, or regulation that restricts the rights of any law-abiding citizen, end of quote. Yeah. So there's how it goes, folks. And that's the latest update, and let's go ahead and play the outro music. It's time to say goodbye for another week for As Ottawa County Turns. Join us again soon for another edition of As Ottawa County Turns. This program is produced for Big D Entertainment. Stay tuned for the Edge of Blight over most of these stations. I'm still waiting to see any reviews for the Edge of Blight, so if you've seen that, please reach out to me. And right now, let's go ahead to our next segment.
Stop! Hammer time!
Oh yeah, it's hammer time. It's time to drop the hammer on the douchebag of the week. Our winner this week, Houghton University in upstate New York. I have this story. This is John L. Dorman writing for Business Insider. This is dated May 20th. 2 staffers at a private Christian liberal arts college in upstate New York were fired from their positions after including their pronouns in work emails. That's according to a report published by the New York Times. After administrators at Houghton University asked Reagan Zelaya and Shua Wilmot, 2 residence hall directors, to remove the she, her, and he, him pronouns from their emails, respectively, they both declined to do so. This led to the Wesleyan Church-affiliated institution dismissing them last month. Roughly 600 Houghton alumni have written to the university in protest of the move, the report said, which comes as Republican lawmakers across the country have rallied against the use of preferred pronouns, especially in schools and workplaces, as transgender Americans have struggled to get others to use the pronouns that correspond with their gender identities. Zelaya and Wilmot told the New York Times they had a reason for choosing to utilize pronouns in their emails, pointing to their gender-neutral names that sometimes cause people to misgender them. Both Zelaya and Wilmot are cisgender. Wilmot told the New York Times, quote, there's the professional piece to it and the practical piece, and there's also an inclusive piece, and I think that's the piece this institution doesn't want. I think it boils down to they want to be trans-exclusive and they want to communicate that to potential students and the parents of potential students, end of quote. In 2021, Houghton shut down a multicultural student center and chose not to recognize an on-campus LGBTQ club after the club chose not to endorse more conservative stances regarding sex and gender, again according to the report published by the New York Times. But in a statement to them, Michael Blankenship, a spokesperson for the university, said that the institution, quote, has never terminated an employee relationship based solely on the use of pronouns in staff email signatures. End of quote. Yeah, until now. He told the Times, quote, over the past years, we've required anything extraneous be removed from email signatures, including scripture quotes. End of quote. I bet. Zelaya shared her termination letter from Houghton Online, which stated that her employment at the university was ending, quote, as a result of your refusal to remove pronouns in your email signature in violation of institutional policy, end of quote, in addition to criticism that she made over a decision made by the university regarding the student newspaper. On its website, the Wesleyan Church takes a conservative stance on gender identity, remarking that gender confusion and dysphoria are ultimately the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual consequences of the human race's fallen condition. Yeah, they said that. The alumni who spoke out in support of Zelaya and Wilmot in an open letter said that the ability to hold and debate opposing views was a vital part of their experience at Houghton. The signatories said, quote, we request that the institution acknowledge that there is a range of views reasonably held by faithful and active Christians on topics of gender, sexuality, and race. In practice, this would mean a broadened understanding of the views that are acceptable for staff, faculty, and chapel speakers to hold and express. End of quote. Houghton University President Wayne D. Lewis Jr., in his reply to alumni earlier this month, addressed the institution's decision to close its Center for Sustainability and reiterated the university's Christian principles, but did not specifically address Zelaya and Wilmot's terminations, despite issuing a message about employment at Houghton. He wrote, quote, Houghton unapologetically privileges as an Orthodox Christian worldview, rooted in the Wesleyan theological tradition. At the time of their appointment and again annually, every Houghton employee affirms his or her understanding of and agreement to these commitments. This is not a new position for the university. End of quote. The firings at Houghton University are the latest flashpoint amid an onslaught of anti-LGBTQ legislation and movements across the country. Utah passed a bill this week that bans minors from receiving gender-affirming health care, and at least 21 other states are considering bills this year that would enact similar bans. So, to Houghton University, we have this message for you.
Don't be a douchebag.
Oh, yeah, you got that right. Hey, you guys can't help it. You're a bunch of Christo-fascists and douchebags while we're at it here. One final point that I want to get to, I want to applaud Hayley Williams, the lead singer of the band Paramore. During a show a few days ago, she broke up a fight in the crowd and told them basically, knock it off. If you want to do that, take it outside. Don't do it here at my show. She then went on to criticize Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and told the crowd that if you vote for him, you are fucking dead in my eyes. That is a direct quote from Hayley Williams, and I absolutely love it. Hayley Williams, to me, is one of the best singers. I've actually attended a Paramore concert with our announcer. Best show I've ever been to. Total energy, great show, great crowd. Hayley Williams, you are the hero today for laying down the law. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.